Hello, and welcome to another great segment with the Learning Project. I'm your host today, Stephanie Courtney, and I'm so excited today. We have a very special guest, Miss Donell Barlow, the one and only. She's going to be talking to us about nutrition, you guys, and let me tell you, she has been a huge part of my fertility journey. You do not want to miss this.
Hey everybody, it's Stephanie from the Learning Project. I want to welcome you to our special segment called Sending Strength and Love. I want to introduce someone that you guys probably have seen before. Her name is Donell. Let me tell you, she has been such an amazing gift in my life. And I wanted to share this with you guys since I'm sharing my personal story of infertility and pregnancy. Donell has helped me on my journey of infertility and really trying to navigate my nutrition through food, tea, foraging. We're going to talk about it all. So I'm really excited to have you here again, Donell. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So a lot of people may not know what you actually do on your flip side of your business. So you guys, for those that watched my last podcast series, you saw that Donell was a children's author and she has written so many amazing books. And also she has written another amazing book I just started reading called The Medicine Tracker and Medicine Track, excuse me. And this has been so cool, you guys. If you don't have this and you're looking for a good read, this is really good. And I just started reading it because I have gotten connected with Donell. So Donell, tell us a little bit about your nutrition side of what you do.
Okay, so I've been a certified holistic health coach now for about 7 years. And that journey came through my own relationship to food and having to heal some ailments, that physical ailments I was having throughout my childhood that I wasn't able to take care of through basically just through modern, just the way of doing things, the Western way of doing things and just go to doctors. And so that's kind of what started my journey. And I realized as I started going back to the traditional foods of my culture and remembering the things that my grandparents used to feed me when I would visit with them, it really started to change my relationship to food again, and it helped heal my body. And so that became the focus of really what I do when it comes to health coaching is using food as medicine. And so I apply that to adults, to children, and then that's also what I applied to fertility as well. Yeah. So really looking into those things, especially stuff that's growing around our area, that's going to really support the fertility journey. And then I looked into specifically what your roots were, what your indigenous roots were, and what your ancestors utilized as far as, fertility, rites of passage, and those types of things, so that could be incorporated into your fertility journey as well. And when we look at that, it becomes a whole other experience, and so it was really important to me that I was able to, and this is something that I do for all the clients that I work with, is I want to know what your roots are and what your relationship to food was, so I can kind of find the things that might have been missed somehow, or maybe have been forgotten about, but they were utilized at some point, during your childhood, because maybe your grandparents made them for you.
Yeah.
And so just kind of figuring out those little pieces and then putting together a program that's unique for the individual.
I love this. So for those that don't know, so I am African American. My mom and her side of the family, they're Native American, Cherokee and Navajo Indian. And so I had got to a point where I just said, I feel like something's missing in my fertility journey. And I wasn't sure like what it actually was. And so, that when Donell had introduced me to, what she was doing and how she was helping people, I was just like, you know what, am I missing the nutrition piece? So for those that have watched my other podcast series, I had quit my job because I was super stressed out. My body was just completely saturated with stress. I was doing acupuncture, trying to keep my body very much aligned. For those that do acupuncture, like it's like I feel like it's like a magic kind of thing. But there is definitely a science to it. And then I had never really dealt with my nutrition. I just felt like, oh, well, I'm eating fine. I eat pretty healthy. I'm not eating tons of sugars and fatty foods. I have a pretty clean diet. It should be good to go. And, when Donnell actually started talking to me about, eating to your ancestry and eating according to your native diet and kind of getting back to some of those roots, it started making me think like, okay, like I don't know everything about my background, but I know some things about my background. And my grandmother, my mother have passed a lot of native traditions in our family and how they cook different things like that. So I was really intrigued by this. And so Donnell just started off with, a I don't know if it's called like, what do you call it? An application or a overview of like my medical health or whatever. So can you
Mhm.
actually talk a little bit about that? Because your process is so different than other
Mhm.
people's like application process when they're getting information about my, medical background.
Yeah. So it's called a health history application, and it asks questions that are so much more in depth again than what our like Western, medicine does. So it asks you about what your diet was as a child and how you ate versus how you eat now. It
Mm-hmm.
asks about how many hours of sleep that you get. What's your stress level? What is the health of your parents and what
Mm-hmm.
was their diet like? And so it starts to get you thinking about really what it's about is what your relationship is to food. So I'm
Yeah.
asking you all these different questions to figure out how that was formed, how it impacted you, and how it impacts you now, so
Mm-hmm.
that we can start to figure out the best plan to get you back, to where you need to be. Because if I'm aware of some of those things, they're gonna, prohibit progress. So, if the stress is really high, if you're not getting enough quality sleep, if there's other
Mm-hmm.
things that are going on, I need to be aware of those things because they're not going to necessarily support
Yeah.
the journey of food, with using the food as medicine. And then it's also treating you as not just treating the physical, but it's the mind, body, spirit connection, which is very
Yes.
important and something that our, Native American ancestry has always understood is that we have to look at what the root cause is. And so we have to go deeper with some of those questions so that we can actually figure out what's going on so that we can make a change that's going to last.
I love it. I love it. And this was really interesting for me because it made me actually go back and start asking my mom questions, my sister's questions, and really learning about who they are, and then medically on a deeper level, stuff I would have never even asked them. And so I think that's a huge piece, and that was something that really caught my eye in the very beginning of this process.
Mhm.
So after I finished this application, I had my first visit with Donell, and I really wasn't sure what to expect. So, what's kind of your first step with your clients when going down this journey?
Um, I really just kind of start to first like develop some kind of relationship and trust because this is a very personal way of, I don't want to say treatment, but like guiding someone along
Yeah.
this path to change. It requires a lot of vulnerability from you and, being the client. And so I
Mhm.
have to develop some type of trust,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where we start. And sometimes that begins with me being vulnerable, sharing some of my journey and how, I had to rediscover my relationship to food and some of my ailments that I had. And so that's kind of where I start to begin the process of building that relationship and then just finding out what are the things that are impacting you the most. Where
Mm.
do we need to focus? Because sometimes there's a lot going on
Yeah.
and it feels overwhelming and we just kind of, sometimes people feel defeated before they even begin. So
Yes.
I just kind of try to start off with what are the things that we need to focus on now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's so true because I mean, when I started on this, I kind of wasn't sure. I was like, I don't really know. if this is something that I really need to do or have to do or even want to do. Because you get to a point where you're just so defeated by the journey of infertility. And then if on top of that, if you've had miscarriages, you're dealing with a whole nother group of feelings on top of those feelings. And then on top of that, when you're talking about that trust piece, when you don't have trust in yourself, you don't have trust in your body, nothing has worked. It's like, this is just one more task that I'm doing that probably is not going to work. And you kind of have these negative thoughts where you're like, you have to change those things. You have to come into this with a very positive mindset and a very different viewpoint. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed was learning about the different teas. And you had given me a couple of teas that you had dried yourself, picked yourself, all of these things. So tell me, what made you choose the teas that you did? One of my favorites was the rose hip, and that was just so deep. The things that I learned about what rose hip does for your body.
Mm-hmm. Well, I start off usually with teas because it's a really, it's a more simple way. It's a more gentle way to get people to utilize the plant medicine. And it's something that the client can also participate in. So if I can encourage you, or, we were able to do it together, to get out there and actually forage it yourself, it's something that you're going to feel more comfortable doing. Then that starts to change the whole process, the whole relationship to the plant itself. And so that's part of why I start off with teas, because people seem to be more open to trying teas, for one, but also they can actually go out and forage them. Rose hips in particular are very high in vitamin C. They're one of the most highest concentrations of vitamin C that you can get. But the reason why is because there's a big significance to rose hips in Native American culture. And so rose hips are used to make rose water, which we utilize for a lot of different spiritual purposes. And so I wanted to introduce that to you as a way of dealing with some of the trauma that you had gone through your fertility journey. But also just to really nourish your body as if you're ingesting it. So it's something that can be used externally or internally.
Yes.
And that was why it was one of the things that I utilize. Also the raspberry leaves, because they're very accessible. And they're really amazing for balancing hormones. And so it's something that you can utilize with fertility as well. And that one, a lot of people have raspberries that grow around them or have access to the leaves, whether they're wild or domesticated. And so I also go by season. So depending on when I'm working with you, I try to, know what's in season and what's available.
That's really good to know.
Yeah. Like as of right now, obviously I wouldn't be able to forage, some things, and, there's not as much available right now. But there are some things that are still there that I could access and because I really encourage people to get out into nature. That's a huge part of what I do as far as health coaching, because that is something that we all inherently need to be balanced, is to restore that relationship to the natural world. So that's a part, of the tea too, and why I encourage people, as I really want people to. And for you explained to me, like, you don't get into nature as much as you'd like to. So, the foraging was a good way to introduce you to that. That relationship to
it
nature.
Really was. And it was so interesting when we actually did this, because I was kind of like, foraging, I don't know what that is. And so, Donell was like, hey, one of our sessions, we're going to go out into the woods, or the woods, and we're going to find these different teas and different things that you can use to help with your fertility journey. And I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was open to it. And I'm so glad that we did. We actually went and got sage, and sage water. Is it sage water, right? We got sage. Yes,
river sage.
River sage. That's what it was. River sage. And so, not only were we able to, I was able to learn how to find this, but also how to bundle it, and really understand what it means to, you know, get find what you need and bring it into your life. And I think that's really hard for a lot of people because we're so disconnected to nature and we're so disconnected to farming and growing. And
Mhm.
so, I know there's a huge movement of people that are saying, you know what, we need to get back to this. And I just feel like you're one of those voices out there that's saying we need to get back to this because there's so many important elements that will help heal your body.
Mhm.
And so for me, learning to not just drink a tea and sit down, but actually take that time to drink your tea and meditate and really give yourself that time to center yourself and
Mhm.
to think about your fertility. I'll never forget, you said something really important to me. I don't even think you know how important this was to me when you said, we're going to start treating you like you're pregnant. And
Mhm.
that those words were so powerful for me because there was so much denied access that I gave myself when it came to that. Because if I thought that I was pregnant or, dealing with, accepting I could be pregnant, I was more concerned about the disappointment versus like the actual happiness of what that journey actually can look like. And so for me, that was a huge mindset thing, to start treating myself like I was pregnant and
Mhm.
carrying myself like I was pregnant. What made you like say that to me, and what kind of set that ball in place?
Um, I would say probably, I mean, that made me almost teary-eyed when you said that, by the way, because that
Oh,
means a lot that it impacted you so much. I'm very a strong believer in that, how intentions and how we create our realities and what manifests. And so our minds are powerful. And
mm,
so it's incredibly important that when we have something that, we really want to attain in this life, that we already foresee that it's already there for us,
yeah.
and that we trust in that.
Hmm.
And so it was part of that was about you trusting your body again,
Hmm.
um, you know, and not allowing some of that past trauma to overwhelm or overtake like this new journey that we were having together. I feel
Yeah.
like was part of that. Um, and to just kind of set a new pathway because we know that oftentimes when we've had a lot of trauma in our lives and we attach to that trauma and attach to
Yeah.
that suffering, it sets off different receptors in the brain. There's different connectors in the brain, and we
Yeah.
actually get something from that. It becomes an addiction.
Mm.
And so when we start to, a new pathway and a new way of thinking, we start to break some of those connections
Yeah.
that were prohibiting progress.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be able to kind of help you forage that new pathway and that new way of thinking so it could allow, something, allow that pregnancy to come through and to feel, different and really just so you could trust your body again, because I
Mhm.
noticed that was such a big part of your, the journey for people that
Yeah.
have to deal with infertility
Mhm.
and how it really just causes so much trauma.
It
um,
does. It
yeah.
really does. And I think for me, like, I felt so much trust in you and I believed so much in what you were saying. When you said it to me, I like let it penetrate my heart. And, I remember like one morning, like I was drinking my rose hip tea and I was doing my little meditation and listening to all my little positive vibes stuff. And I remember being able to say, like, I can't wait until I get pregnant. And I
Mhm.
can't wait to share this moments of peace and meditation with my child. Like
Mhm.
it was so much it was so much freedom. And I think
Mhm.
that's what's so hard about infertility. There's so much restriction and there's so much defeat and there's so much anger and there's so much pain, so much sadness. There's so many things that almost like are capsules and they just take pieces of you.
Mhm.
And so then when you find something that's just like popping those open, it's just really giving you this full on relief of being able to accept a new story instead of
Mhm.
listening to the story that you've told yourself so many times. And it's so deep what you said when you were talking about how trauma can become your new addiction. You know what I mean? Where you're addicted to that trauma and it does something to your brain, your mind. It connects with you on such a deep level. Like that is so deep. And for those that did not hear that, please rewind it and go back to it and listen to it because that is something that is so true. Like I by the time you hear this podcast, you guys will know that I am pregnant.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was really hard for me making the adjustment between pregnancy or infertility and pregnancy was my brain. Like I could not, and I still struggle with it. I could not make the connection that I am pregnant and I'm not going to lose this baby this time. Like I was so anticipating the loss. Like I was waiting for something bad to happen because again, it's like that addiction to that negative piece. And I was just like, what are you doing? Like, why are you putting yourself in such a negative mindset that it's literally going to destroy what you have been hoping, praying, meditating for, focusing on? You gave up your career, your job, which you were making really good money. You loved what you were doing, and you're about to give all this up because of some negative thoughts, something that hasn't even happened. But
Mhm.
you are so waiting for that to happen, that waiting for the shoe to drop, you know?
Mhm.
And I just felt like a lot of the pieces that we went through kind of helped me mentally work through that. And I think a lot of times we get into the point too where we just want to jump into different pieces of
Mhm.
fixing infertility instead of like the spiritual side and the emotional side of fixing yourself with infertility. And it's a lot of work. And so one of the things you told me, Donnell, that I want definitely our listeners to hear is that the rose hip that you had given me this first little package, you were like, Stephanie, this is going to help you do some healing because you've
Mhm.
had a lot of trauma with miscarriages. Can you talk a little bit about that and how a tea can really help maybe with that process of healing?
Mhm. Yeah. So, I mean, when we had, had our few sessions and stuff, I knew that past trauma was definitely going to be very impactful as we
Yeah,
moved forward. And so,
yeah.
like I said, we have to address the mind, the body, and the spirit when we actually want to make that change.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can actually trust the process.
Yeah.
So I knew that I had to address some healing for you around the loss that you had
Yeah.
experienced in order for us to move forward in our journey together with infertility. And so, as I had mentioned, like in our culture, how rose hips are so significant with healing. We'll use them, in ceremony to cleanse the body,
Yeah.
to kind of renew the body, but also as protection. Well, or if they're used also when someone has passed, to help them move on to the next world, without
Mm-hmm.
being stuck here. And so it has a lot of different significances in it. And when you bathe in it, it can just become a very powerful way of releasing and healing. And
Yeah.
your body recognizes the indigenous foods and plants and medicines of your ancestors, no matter where
Mm-hmm.
you're from. Your body recognizes that as medicine. It is in your DNA, it is in your genes. And so when you are utilizing that and putting that intention, it is very powerful what
Hmm.
it can offer you.
Yes.
And I knew that I didn't want to disregard or not I wanted to make sure that the little spirits that you had, lost through your miscarriages were also recognized. And
Yes.
so a part of that was having you do that was recognizing those little spirits that were, only there for a short time, and, having these visualizations and meditations and ways to find some peace
Yes.
in that so that you could move forward, that you could start healing some of that trauma. And so that as you were going to become pregnant, and we already thought of you as pregnant, that just wouldn't be holding you back, you
Yeah.
know?
Like you guys, you don't even know. Like when I first was going through this, there was like some hesitation because I was like, is this really like real? Is this gonna happen? Is it? But it's like it's all about your mindset and it's all about you accepting the journey and accepting the healing and accepting the things that are around your body, your mind, all of that stuff. And it can be very difficult, accepting those things when you're just in that state, in that mind. And one of the things that really hit me was when I was talking with you, and you're probably like the first person that actually gave me permission to recognize the babies that I lost. You know what I mean? A lot of people will say, well, at least you weren't this far along, or at least you weren't, having the baby and it's a stillborn, at least you didn't, it was always at least. So it's like, sometimes, yes, those things are way worse than what I feel like I went through, but I started minimalizing what I actually experienced because, and I think that's in our society, instead of just saying, hey, we want to mourn with you and we want to recognize what you actually went through, no matter how big or small, those things impacted you. And we want you to know that we see you, we see the babies that you lost, and we believe you. It's a really weird thing because you're like, was I pregnant? Did that happen? Did this happen? Because it's such a mind game. It's such a tricky thing to go through. You're pregnant one moment and you're all excited, and then maybe a couple weeks later you're not pregnant, and that is hard to realize and to accept. And so I just really appreciated that. And that was something that was really important to my journey and being able to heal from. And I think a lot of people don't know how to heal from miscarriages. Sometimes people don't want to go to like a counselor, but having someone guide you through some things and be able just to talk to you about what can you do overall to be more healthy, to get your mind in a really good spot so that you can succeed and push through. I think those things are critical and they're crucial and they're extremely important to being able to function. Sometimes it just makes you almost paralyzed, going through those things. And so to have someone that can help you go through that is extremely important. And so the next part of our journey actually was kind of interesting. So we really started dealing with food. And so we started talking about organ meats. This was a task, y'all. So Donell gave me like a list of organ meats to look at. And she also talked to me about how to really purchase meat. And that has been a key component in my life. And I've really tried to stick to that. I'm not 100% there, but I really tried to stick to purchasing meat from butchers. So tell me a little bit about what made you talk about the type of foods that I really needed to focus on and where I needed to shop for the foods that I was eating.
Okay. So, well, first you had you had a very clean diet. So, so that was nice. I didn't have to do a whole lot with like, cut this out, cut that out. But what I had discovered is that there were some key vitamins that were missing that really are only found in organ meats, or at least high quality, a high quantity of them in organ meats. And our ancestors, again, this is all of our ancestors, they hunt, before we had the supermarkets and factory farming, they hunted. And so they would use every part of the animal. And back then we didn't, know that certain parts of the animal contained these vitamins, but we knew that it was important for us and it was utilized. And so that was a huge part of maintaining, just our healthy, our being, having a really strong vitality. And so I wanted to incorporate, because when I had looked at your diet and looked at some of the key things that you needed, to increase your fertility, it was organ meats. And I also knew that I needed to work you into it in a very mild way. And so that's why we started with the liver and the liver pate, because it's just a little bit less, I don't know what the word I want to use for, but it's not as aggressive as far as some of the other things.
Mhm.
And when it comes to the purchasing, so I had mentioned, that we hunted. And a big part of that was it was a very intimate relationship with the animal, with the food. And so these animals were living in their environment. They were eating the diet that they were meant to be eating. And they, experienced the life they were supposed to experience. And
Yeah.
so if you really do understand that everything is connected, then you also have to understand that when you're eating meat, you're ingesting those experiences of
Mm.
that animal. And so if they're living in an environment where they are very stressed, they're not eating the right diet, they're not being cared for properly, they are experiencing a lot of stress. They are releasing a lot of hormones into the body, just as we are. And so when we
Mm.
ingest that animal, we are we are internally ingesting that energy as well. And
Wow.
so that's why it's critical to, if you're able to, either whether it's hunting or going to the butcher, knowing where your meat comes from and having more of an intimate relationship with it definitely does make a difference when it comes to how it's going to affect your body internally. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's why, I kind of had you, switch it up there, because it seemed like, from what I could understand with what we were needing as far as diet, that organ meats were going to be a really big game changer for you, and you
Yeah.
went full on, and I was super impressed. Because it's not an easy one. And
Uh-uh.
bone broth, I would say too, is a really great way to begin that journey for
Yeah.
people who just want to get some of the really amazing benefits, but they can't necessarily commit to, the hearts and the feet and the different things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I was so proud of you, because I haven't even been able to do all the things that you do as far as what you were doing. Um, but there was a reason why our ancestors did the things the way that they did them.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
more we go back to those ways and those teachings, the health, we will become healthier and more connected to the natural world.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what's so funny, you guys? So the first thing Donell did, she actually made a Pinterest board for me that I could go to get like my recipes and food and stuff like that. And I was so excited about making this bone broth because she gave me a recipe that I had never seen before. And it was so, I mean, the colors that I was using in this bone broth were so amazing. And it was so funny because other people like were smelling it at my house. They were like, "Oh, it smells so good. Can you make
Mhm.
me some too?" So I'm like having two crock pots and making people bone broth and taking it to their house and stuff. And I just like that part for me was really awesome. Like just being able to start off with something so simple and so easy. It wasn't until I got to the organ meats where I was like kind of like a fish out of water.
Mhm.
But I went to a place called Edgar's Meats, which I thought was it's a really great butcher store if you live in Spokane, Washington. You can find a butcher anywhere. Like, and that's the thing that's so interesting.
Mhm.
Like, I don't ever remember like people saying, "Oh, go to the butcher to buy food." You know, it's supposed to go to the supermarket. So when we went to Edgar's Meats, it was just like a huge. It was a different experience. I was not expecting to experience what I was experiencing at
Mhm.
also too, the meats taste very different. That
Mhm.
kind of freaked me out. Meaning they taste a lot fresher. The textures were different. And so I just said to myself, okay, well, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna look and see what's in here. And then I realized that the meats actually sometimes are cheaper at the butcher than they are at the supermarket. And I was actually surprised about that too. And so, everything is right there. My goal was to spend like $50, maybe like, every week or every 2 weeks on meat, depending on what I needed, depending on if I was on my cycle or not on my cycle. But I was eating a lot of fish and even like a lot of salmon I was eating. Like I didn't realize quality of salmon is so different than fresh caught salmon. I don't know why it didn't click for me, but for
Mhm.
some reason it didn't. I felt like I was eating all the right foods, but I wasn't getting any results. I didn't feel a
Mhm.
certain way. And so I was so impressed and so excited about the meats that I was eating, I was actually telling everybody else about it. And then everybody, like a couple of my family members now, they go to Edgar's Meats to get their meat only. And they're like, I can't eat any other meat because it doesn't taste right. And
Mhm.
so that was something that I really learned. And when I first started eating the organ meats, I was like, this is disgusting. I can't even do this. And, most of the times when people do like liver and onions, they're like sobbing it down with like
Mhm.
gravy. And then I was like, I can't do that because it's going to take all the nutrition away.
Mhm.
So it's got to be a lighter version. But I mean, I made it through and I, started really taking it super serious as far as how much I was eating and, when I was eating it, making it a part of my meal plan. It was something that it was really difficult in the beginning, but I'm really glad that I did it. And the interesting thing was, I had shared this in one of my other podcasts. So I had switched doctors. My new doctor was in LA named Dr. Wu, and she actually drew blood and she found out I had a vitamin deficiency in B6 and 12. And then she also said I had a vitamin D deficiency, and it's probably because I don't ever go outside. Like, or when I do go outside, I go out for a little bit, then I come back inside. But really being outside for a long period of time, so that vitamin D can really get into my skin. For those that have darker skin, I know that sometimes vitamin D can be hard to really soak in. And so that was something that I had to really focus on. And so when I felt like when I got on the organ meats and I started actually researching like how many minerals were in organ meats, I was blown away. I could not believe how much nutrition was in them. And I mean, it made sense then too, because we always talk about, oh, back in the day, they didn't get this, or back in the day, they didn't get that. Of course, they weren't getting any of that stuff. They
Mhm.
actually were getting all the minerals and nutrients that they needed in their body. And now everything is so genetically modified, and sometimes we can't even tell. It was hard, for me to actually get that in my brain and say, no, you actually have to eat like this because you're not actually getting the nutrients and you're not getting the vitamins and things that you need.
Mhm.
So that was a huge game changer for me, and me understanding what it meant to eat clean. On top of that, my dad, he's a gardener. So he has like his house is crazy. Like the backyard, literally, you can come out with grocery bags of food. He's got everything from cucumbers to tomatoes to apples and peaches and plums. And I know a lot of people don't have that, but I was literally only eating his vegetables and fruits, and then I was eating, this clean meat. And so I literally put myself on a really hardcore diet, and I committed to what you were saying, Donnell, and it
Mhm.
really just changed my life. And changed my world. And, and it's not to say I don't have slip ups. You might see me eat something I
Mhm.
probably shouldn't be eating, but, I know in the back of my mind that this has been for generations or, decades I've been eating like this. So it's going to take time for me to break that cycle.
Mhm.
Say, it's okay to have a little something, something here, but like, let's not make it an everyday process part of my life. So
Mhm.
how do people balance that? Because sometimes people go on this fertility journey and they start going into the nutrition part and they become obsessed with it. And like, if they're not
Mhm.
eating what they're supposed to be eating, and I actually went through this too, where if I wouldn't eat what I was going to eat, where I was supposed to eat, I would feel so much guilt and I would
Mhm.
feel like almost shame and just mad at myself because I wasn't eating some of the foods that I felt like I needed to eat. So, what can people do to balance that feeling and as they're going through the food journey?
So my school, I went to the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And what they say is 90% of the time, eat well, eat for your body what it needs, and then 10%, eat what you want,
Yeah.
which I think is a pretty fair number. And really, it comes down to balance. And I tell people when they do eat things that perhaps are not the best nutrient dense foods, it's important that you enjoy it. If you're
Mm,
eating that food, and you're also feeling that guilt and that shame, it really kind of defeats the purpose of giving yourself that treat.
yeah.
But those things are also very powerful. As we talked about in the beginning, our mind is incredibly powerful, and the thoughts that we put in, that we put out
Yes.
there. And so if you are going to treat yourself, then treat yourself. And I always recommend, as opposed to like, if you're able to bake cookies as opposed to buying cookies, if you actually are making the food yourself, you know what I mean? There is a little bit more of a you know what I mean? Understanding relationship. And I do feel like you'll enjoy it more
Yeah.
too, if you like put the effort into making it yourself. Um, but you know, we're coming into the holidays. We're coming into, people have their holiday weight gain, and there, with that, you know, comes a lot of different feelings with
Yeah.
a mixed emotions with food.
Yeah.
And so just giving yourself, you know, some of that grace, you know, knowing that you might eat things that might not be the best for your body, as I said, nutrient dense, but then getting back on track, you
Yeah.
know, and just understanding what's really important too. You know, if you
Mhm.
have really serious health ailments, then, you know, doing that 10% might not be something
Mm.
that's great for you, but
Yeah.
for the majority of us, we can live in that 90-10 and be in good physical condition, you know,
Yeah.
um, and not have to worry so much about, you know, that candy or that treat or that vice that we're having. But it is
Mhm.
important to have a balance. And also, I want to say that with your relationship to food becomes your children's relationship to food.
Mm.
So if you are, you know, living in a space of, you know, where it's very, you know, like you're very militant about what you're eating and, you know, obsessive about it, and that is your relationship to food, and you don't allow yourself those other things, your children are going to be impacted by that. And so
Mm.
you're setting that example, just as you do for anything, for
Yeah.
any behaviors we have, you are setting the example for your children. And so if they see that you have a healthy relationship to food, then you're going to be passing that on to them.
I
So that's
love it.
also something to consider.
I love it. Thank
Mhm.
you for sharing that because, you know, we don't really think about that. You know, I think a lot of times we think about how it impacts us as an individual, but how does it really impact our children in and out the womb? You know, it's something that we want to make sure that, you know, our kids don't have those issues or have trouble with really being committed to living a healthy lifestyle, you know? So Donnell, before we end this podcast, I would like to hear a little bit from you. What are some of your tips or some of your just like suggestions or inspirations that you would like to give our listeners before ending the podcast?
Oh, well, let's see. Um, I would say some tips would be really just take a moment, just jot down a few things about what you think your relationship is to food,
Mm.
and how that began. You know, just start making just a few little notes about that if you are somebody who's struggling, you know, with you know, something that's being impacted through nutrition. I also really want to emphasize, which people aren't going to want to hear this right before the holidays, but sugar is the number one most addictive substance in the world.
Yeah.
So if you are suffering from any kind of inflammation, whether it's arthritis, bronchitis, any type of physical ailments in the body, gut issues, inflammation, sugar is going to exasperate that.
Mm.
So, you know, a lot of people don't understand, well, I'm taking this medication for that, or I'm doing this, you know, that should be helping with that. And then I always ask, well, how much sugar do you eat?
Hmm.
And the answer is always, you know, too much. So know that you're working against it when you are eating a lot of sugar. It's going to create that inflammation in the body. So that's something that's really important to understand. When you do eat sugar, if you eat a little bit of protein, it's going to help not spike your insulin levels.
Hmm.
So that's something to consider that can be really helpful this time of year. Um, and I would say one more piece of advice is to take the shame, the guilt out of your relationship to food, because it's
Hmm.
not going to serve a higher good at
Yeah.
all. You know, and just have some grace with yourself. Would be another last piece to that is as you're going down that food journey, is just being graceful with yourself, knowing that your relationship to food came from your parents
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. And, you know, just if it's something that you're not happy with, doing that work, not just for yourself, but for your children and your children's children, and just knowing that that impact can really be so much bigger than what we realize, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh,
Mhm.
You guys, I hope your soul, your mind, everything was fed because I know that I'm just so grateful for you being here, Donell. I know that you have helped me so much on my journey and we continue to journey together.
Mhm.
And it's so comforting to know. And I just want to put this out here, you guys. You don't have to do this alone. You know, COVID has really created all boxes, all forms of connection, out of the box, being able to have Zoom conversations and really have somebody guide you and walk you through it. It is so important. And don't feel like it has to be the end of your journey, right when you decide something or something happens. You want to make sure that you have someone that will help you throughout that entire journey to help make sure that you are in a good, healthy spot so that you can be your best. I want to
Mhm.
thank you so much, Donnell, for being on this podcast series today. Where can people find you if they're like, you know what, I would like to connect with her so that I can actually see if this is something that I need or it's good for me?
Mhm. Well, you can definitely check out my website, which is donnellbarlow.com. It has recipes, it has cooking videos, and then I just share just some of my journey through pregnancy, and just some of the things that I needed to do to balance out my diet, as I became a new mother, because that changes things as well.
Yeah.
So that's a really good way to reach me. It also has my email address, so you can contact me directly. I also have a health coach page on Facebook, Donell Barlow, and so those would probably be the best ways to contact me.
Perfect. Well, thank
Mhm.
you. You guys don't worry. Right below this podcast, all of Donnell's information will be right below. I want to thank you guys so much for listening. I'm sending you so much strength and love today.
Mhm.
I hope you have a wonderful day. Know that you are not on this journey alone. Whether you're going through the journey or you know someone that's going through the journey or you're trying to figure out what your journey is all about, these podcasts are for you. I want to thank you again. And until next time, you guys, see you later.
Bye.
Bye.